So good morning and welcome again. And welcome to everybody joining us in the room and of course the many people joining us online, including of course our two guests who will be speaking to us this morning. Just to set the scene again, to get us back into the dynamic of the exercises that we are considering. So today we are looking, of course, at the third week of the exercises. This is our background for our reflections today. And we remember in that third week that we pray for the grace of compassion, the grace to suffer with those who are suffering, the crucified Lord. And it's against this background that we enter our considerations, our topics, our reflections for today. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Father Orobator. He is joining us online. He's the Dean of the Jesuit School of Theology of Santa Clara University, originally from Nigeria. So he has served as provincial for the Jesuit province of Eastern Africa and the president of the Jesuit Conference of Africa and Madagascar. He is also a delegate to the Synod on Synodality and is the author of a number of books. He will be joining us for a short presentation today, and we are very grateful for his time. So now I hand over to Father Orobator.
For this symposium on the spiritual exercises and ecological conversion, we'd like to offer a reflection on the spiritual exercises number 196, which says to consider how the Lord is hidden during the Passion, and on the sorrow of the earth and of human beings crucified by our consumerist civilization. The third week of the spiritual exercises places us in front of the brutal reality of the cross. Jesus crucified wears a crown of sharp thorns, and his body is lacerated by multiple lashes of the whip. In front of the crucified Christ, what is there to say? Nothing. It's a wordless encounter. It is enough to simply look at Jesus and allow him the privilege of returning the gaze. In the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, Ignatius makes a shocking statement that, quote, divinity hides itself. Instead of revealing himself as the valiant conqueror, God allows his most holy humanity to suffer so cruelly. In making this observation, it is clear that Ignatius does not want to sweeten or falsify painful realities. The heart-wrenching experience of suffering and death seems to confirm the intuition and insight of Ignatius that at times like this, more than ever, when we long to see the face of God, God appears to be absent, leaving us feeling vulnerable, frightened, and abandoned. God hides while humanity suffers so cruelly. Like the prophet Habakkuk, one is tempted to ask, how long, O Lord, will your divinity continue to hide itself? In this era of climate change, when we are witnessing catastrophic consequences of unrestrained power to use and misuse the gift of creation on the basis of a technocratic paradigm, we have vivid and concrete example of the hiddenness of divinity in the midst of brokenness, of pain and suffering. These realities of brokenness, pain, and suffering are also the realities of the earth, our common home. As Francis, our Pope, laments, quote, Never have we so hurt and mistreated our common home as we have in the last 200 years. End of quote. The agony of the earth is the anguish of humanity. The fate of the earth is the burden of the poor. As we have witnessed across the world, the frequency and intensity of extreme and unprecedented weather phenomena such as heat waves, wildfires, atmospheric flooding, prolonged drought, snowstorms, desertification, they are all symptomatic of what Pope Francis calls a silent disease of climate change that affects everyone, especially the poor. As Pope Francis tells us in Laudato Si, the pain and suffering of poverty is a visceral condition of planet Earth. Hence Pope Francis' claim that the cry of the poor is the cry of the earth. That, quote, we are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental, the other social, but rather with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental, end quote. Like the poor, the earth is broken and wounded. Both are threatened by a misguided, reckless, and unchecked human intervention on nature. Accordingly, a preference of love must guide us with heightened resolve to the side of the earth, our home, and to the side of people and communities who suffer the consequences of its devastation. In such situations of ecological pain and agony, inevitably the question of God arises with increasing intensity. Where is God in all this? Where is God? This question confronts us as we gaze on the motionless and seemingly defeated and crucified Christ. Divinity may be hidden, but the crucified Christ is not indifferent. The crucified Christ weeps. It's a kind of weeping that does not wail, but which is full of sorrow. For us to contemplate Jesus in this way on the cross leaves us with a profound and reassuring awareness that at this moment, when the earth and the poor are groaning under the weight of climate change, the destruction of our environment, the pollution of air, land, and water, the crucified Christ is weeping. John, the evangelist, reports that Jesus wept over the death of his friend Lazarus. In these times of climate change and ecological calamity, something similar is happening. The crucified Christ is weeping inconsolably, like Rachel of old, for all the people who are being sacrificed on the altar of greed and consumerism in today's throwaway culture of consumption and waste. Jesus is weeping with the poor and with the earth. God is weeping. Now think about it. The idea of God weeping is disconcerting, almost scandalous. God is supposed to be a strong God, especially at a time like this when humanity seems to be heading towards an ecological apocalypse. Time and again, our Christian story portrays God as the strong deliverer, the mighty one, the victorious warrior, and our sure ransom. Where is this God when the poor and the earth desperately need deliverance from the clutches of climate change and the economy of exclusion and inequality? How does Ignatius of Loyola respond in the spiritual exercises to this situation? Ignatius says that divinity hides itself. Instead of revealing itself as the valiant conqueror, God allows his most holy humanity to suffer so cruelly. By contemplating the crucified Christ weeping on the cross, the pain of so many crucified people reminds us that both the earth and humanity are undergoing a kind of passion. Climate change and all the calamities, tragedies, and catastrophes that it has triggered is an experience of passion. As Pope Francis tells us in Laudato Deum, quote, everything is connected and no one is saved alone. The word itself, passion, is not alien to God. Christian tradition refers to the suffering and death of Jesus as passion. Interestingly, the way we understand this reality might actually be a source of hope. When Ignatius suggests that divinity hides itself, I take it that if we have the courage to look deep into the pain and suffering of the poor and the earth, we discover divinity dwelling within our broken and wounded human condition. We discover divinity dwelling within our broken and wounded common home, the earth. So part of the lesson of the third week is that deep within the pain and suffering of our times, be it personal or communal, be it individual or ecological, faith enables us to see a passionate God who is not averse to suffering. Unlike a distant, all-knowing, unapproachable, and unfeeling being, faith reveals a God who is vulnerable and full of empathy. As we contemplate the crucified Christ, as we feel the sorrow of the earth and of human beings crucified by our consumerist culture, God is, in this moment of our passion, the compassionate one, who suffers as we suffer, who feels our pain and weeps with us. Pope Francis tells us that compassion means to suffer with, to suffer together, to not remain indifferent to the pain and suffering of others, that we are part of the universe. All of us are linked by unseen bonds and together form a kind of universal family. Even Origen in the 2nd century believed that in his mercy, God suffers with us, for God is not heartless. It was the same God who declared with compassion, I have seen the affliction of my people in Egypt and have heard their cry against their taskmasters. So I know well what they are suffering in Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. In this third week of passion and suffering, God is like the chicken in an African proverb who develops a headache when it sees another chicken in the cooking pot. God is weeping. Divinity hides within our suffering and pain. So God cannot be far from suffering and pain of the poor and of the earth, our common home. Divinity hides within our suffering and pain. So God is deeply familiar with our passion. If God cannot and does not suffer with the poor and the earth, it will be hard to see how God could credibly claim to love us. The gospel teaches us that God has professed a self-sacrificing love for us on the cross and is able to feel our pain and hear our cry. Perhaps the question is not so much about God's action as it is about God's location. Out of a preference of love for the poor, God is incarnated among those who are deprived of justice and robbed of dignity. Divinity hides within. The story of God's passion is interwoven with the fabric of our passion, neither of which ends on the cross. Divinity hiding within suffering and pain is the fount of hope, not a black hole of faith. As Pope Francis said in his solitary Urbi et Orbi message at the height of COVID-19 pandemic, quote, we have an anchor. By his cross, we have been saved. We have a rudder. By his cross, we have been redeemed. We have hope. By his cross, we have been healed and embraced so that nothing and no one can separate us from his redeeming love. End of quote. By faith, we know how the story of God's passion ends. Yet, in the time of vulnerability of the poor and of the earth, the road from Golgotha to the empty tomb is long and painful. Only by walking this road with the crucified Christ can we sing the Easter exalted of the risen Christ with confidence and joy. The hiddenness of divinity in moments of pain and suffering means that God is with us in this place that Pope Francis calls thick darkness. The darkness of the passion of the poor and of the earth cannot overcome the light of the risen Christ. No matter how dark the night is, it will surely break into day when divinity, which seemed hidden during the passion, now appears and manifests itself so splendidly in this holy resurrection. That spiritual exercise is number 223. In the final analysis, as we encounter the sorrow of the earth and of human beings crucified by our consummary civilization, the hiddenness of divinity calls us to a radical conversion from mindlessly affecting the earth to consciously being affected by the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, who dwell in those precarious frontiers, peripheries, and margins. The capacity to be moved within lies at the core of who we are. The capacity to be moved within is also at the core of who God is. And that is the message of the third week of the spiritual exercises. Divinity hides within our brokenness, our sorrow, that we might experience with joy and confidence the resurrection of our victorious God.